intellectual luminary of Minnesota, a great inspiration for all conservatives. You can find his works at www.minnesotaconservatives.org. He is John Gilmore. You can also follow him on Twitter at John Gilmore,
Yeah,
Gilmore. And
but Wes, my handle is actually Shabbos Goy, ShabbosGoy, and it's a long story that I don't want to get into here. But that's actually my handle, Shabbos Goy, all one word.
that's hilarious because we know there are some things that are goyim, there are some things that are not. That's fantastic. He's also going to talk today about a new startup venture he has concerning Real Minnesota. It's spelled just the way it sounds, REAL, Minnesota.com. And Mr. John Gilmore, I have some curiosity about your icon there, the image of your identity. What is that? Is that a Da Vinci that I see as a painting there?
That's my avatar on Twitter, and it's a painting by the French artist David, which is spelled like David, and it's called The Death of Marat, Marat. And Marat was a particularly venomous French revolutionary activist. I'd put him somewhat to the left of Robespierre, and I think if you go any further left, you fall off. And Charlotte Corday gained access to him. He was reading some letters and some papers, people wanting him to do this or bringing to his attention people who were engaging in wrongthink. Does that sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
And she got there and then promptly stabbed him once in the chest and got the deed done, no wasted motion. And she was subsequently, I think she was guillotined. It was the fashion. And I actually swapped that out from I don't know what, around 2009 or 2010. I got on Twitter in 2008. And there was some particular reason, given the state of Minnesota Republican politics, which is pathetic, that I did that for. And I've since forgotten. I've tried to remember, and I've stuck with it ever since. And so I'm the dead Frenchman in his tub. But I guess what's old is new again, because we're living through a kind of Americanized Chinese cultural revolution. And I said on Twitter the other day, each day is dumber than the one that came before. How is that possible? And I haven't been proven wrong, because they do seem to keep getting dumber, and I'm not sure where we're going to go, but it's remarkable.
And John, as the French will say, la plus que ça change, la plus que c'est la même chose. The more that things change, the more they remain the same.
That's correct.
Minnesota politics just getting dumber and dumber.
Well, it's actually getting dumber and more radical. And my concern is, and it has been for quite a while, Wes, is that we don't have an opposition party here. Now, we've got 4 states that border us, North and South Dakota to the west, Iowa to the south, and Wisconsin to the east. I think we need to import any of those Republicans and deport the Minnesota one, because they're useless. They're useless. I'm in St. Paul. I can drive 12 minutes down 94 East and be in the beautiful city of Hudson, which I was 2 weeks ago this past Sunday. I lost track of the number of people on Twitter, which is my preferred social media platform, and they said I was going to be dead, by last Sunday. The Supreme Court of Wisconsin threw out Governor Evers' stay-at-home order and said you can't do it unilaterally. And that's only because those Wisconsin Republicans would sometimes get the tarnation beaten out of them. They'd be flat on the mat, but they'd pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and rejoin the fight. Republicans in Minnesota never seem to have any fight to begin with. It's always a series of accommodations.
Appeasement, capitulation, continually trying to satiate the insatiable desires of the leftists.
They want
further to the left.
They want to be liked. And these people don't understand that it's just a matter of sequencing. They don't understand what they're doing is, in so many words, asking to be eaten last.
I spoke with an attorney this morning here in Rochester who said, when I asked her about Mayor Betsy Hodges, now disgraced, resigned, driven off the stage by the left itself, driven further to the left by the left, a DFL mayor. I asked her about Betsy Hodges. The first thing out of this attorney's pie hole, because she had worked for Betsy Hodges, the first thing was, oh, well, she's a very nice person.
Right. And Stalin is said to have liked children.
Yeah, and shot a few as well, along with Che Guevara, who murdered children.
Well, the problem remains that we don't have any significant opposition of note. In the Senate, Paul Gazelka seems to be, slicing the sausage as thin as he can, but he keeps slicing, so eventually more is given away rather than holding firm.
And then there's Mary Kiffmeyer, who breaks down in tears when she loses out on the HAVA money to Secretary Simon, who wants yet more cash to send duplicate upon duplicate absentee voter application to Rochester, Olmsted, Minnesota State residents. Some people here in Rochester have received 3 different applications for absentee voting ballots now.
Well, I'm sure that's received saturation coverage from corporate media in your area, right?
Not a word, not a word.
Minnesota Public Radio wasn't all over that story?
No, they weren't, but I believe you have some good news to convey to us about Minnesota Public Radio. Thank you for bringing that up, because it was news to me when you mentioned that. What is happening with that vampire 24-hour, 7-day-a-week behemoth of creepiness, anti-Americanism known as Minnesota Public Radio? What's going on there exactly?
Well, what I read from various accounts was that more than 24 people have been let go from NPR, and I think it's AMR. I might have that second initials wrong, but I think it's American Media Radio. But that's just a more selective and grandiose peddler of the propaganda that NPR puts out. And what people need to realize is that we held the Senate and the House, you might remember, back in 2017 and 18, and failed to defund them. We couldn't even defund Planned Parenthood. So that's why I'm a conservative and not a Republican, especially in Minnesota. Republicans are just one half of what I call, and it's a common term, I hardly came up with it, the uniparty. And that's why so much doesn't change. And you can even see that happening yesterday with the Supreme Court decision on Title VII, losing Justices Gorsuch and Roberts. So there's so much more work to be done, and people need to realize that the governing classes, including people they vote for, and now I'm just echoing Tucker Carlson, and if people don't watch much TV, I don't, as it happens to be, but I never miss a program of Tucker Carlson, who's on in Minnesota at 7 p.m. each weeknight, which is why the left is in a frenzy. They want his sponsors to leave. He said weeks and weeks ago, white supremacy is a hoax, which is what I throw out on Twitter and just see if, people foam at the mouth. Because if you flatly refuse to believe the narrative, and these narratives are manufactured, and they're manufactured for a reason and for a purpose, they have very specific goals, then they don't have any power. And that's why people who have such a prominent perch like Tucker Carlson receives so many of his attacks. His wife and children were actually surrounded at their home in D.C. Yeah. Nothing these people won't stoop to. There's absolutely nothing. And if you think that you can accommodate them, reason with them, come together, I mean, metaphorically speaking, the next Republican who says we need to reach across the aisle should be, metaphorically speaking, shot, because there is no reaching.
Metaphorically speaking, to be clear.
Well, and that's why we have Wisconsin, which is wide open. I put it this way with respect to the Wuhan virus. I refuse to call it COVID-19. The Wuhan virus for me.
Yes. The bat stew flu. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Wuhan virus is keeping in line with all of the other sort of diseases and viruses. You know, Lyme disease, Ebola. You know the list.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what Wisconsin has proven beyond doubt now, it's what, 6 weeks I think that they've been open, is the virus is real, but the lockdown, social distancing, and masks are the hoax. And in Minnesota and in different cities, you see the switch. They've lost the battle from we're all going to die. It hasn't turned out, thank God, to be nearly as deadly as was first suggested,
Hmm.
except for those in nursing
Nursing homes and long-term care
care
facilities.
and
Sadly, yeah.
Minnesota
It,
leads the nation in deaths. And you won't
because
get
they deliberately put the COVID-19 China virus people in those
right.
facilities. It
You
was
won't get
a
much.
culling.
You won't get much coverage of that from the Minnesota media, most of which is simply an arm of the DFL. And people knew this about the media before Trump, but he's never failed to capitalize on the dishonest and corrupt media, his words. And fake news, not news, fake news, he said, is the enemy of the American people. And we've had uh, one tsunami after another since he up 5 years ago today. Happy day, Wes. He came down the golden escalator, and the rest
Mhm.
is history, and it's still being written. So back to my point about not an opposition party in Minnesota. I think people have to fight back on their own, individually or in groups or in loose
Mhm.
association, and they should try to find whatever they can do in their own
Mhm.
backyard. And one of the things
It-
that I was going about was launching a website of news and opinion called realminnesota.com. I bought the domain name and I have a Gmail account for it. So it's sort of, in its embryonic form, ready to go. But what I would really like to do is focus only about 25% on the Twin Cities. I'm sick to death of a Twin Cities centric media in Minnesota.
Nice.
I don't need to tell you, but you go outside the Twin Cities and it's a different state. Now, some
Yes.
are worse than others. Unfortunately, you're in one of the worst ones. Uh,
Right.
People outside the metro area don't realize how many other like-minded people there are. And what I would like to do is to provide about 75% of content generated from anywhere other than the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area.
Well,
What's going
John,
in Rochester, especially what's not being covered? Give me 500 words, give me 400. It's completely unfunded at this point, which is another sore spot with me. And I've been doing this with state and local politics for more than a decade. Our donors are not particularly bright. They make money in some niche, good for them. Don't have any problem with people making money, right?
mhm.
But they're unlike the leftist donors. You'll see people go into a group of DFL donors, and then the question will come, well, what's the chance of winning, or what's the chance of succeeding, or pulling it off, or whatever the measurement, the metric of success is? And they'll say 40%. And the donors will say, you miss every swing you don't take is a miss. Those are good enough odds for me. So they'll
Right.
fund things at the 40% success level. With
In
Minnesota
fact,
donors,
they'll
they
fund
get north of 75%, and they're still timid.
still timid, and the Democrats and the DFL will even run people on the Republican side posing as conservatives or posing as Republicans. And then you have the party switchers in Minnesota too, who started out as Democrats and they flip over to Republicans when the time comes. And so what you're saying is that perhaps you're saying that I don't want to be like the interviewer who was with Dr. Jordan Peterson saying, so what you're saying is,
Kathy
uh,
Young is her name.
yeah,
Kathy
that's
Young.
the one. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not putting words in your mouth, but I'm going to tell you exactly what you're saying. Um, Minnesota cities exist sort of in bubbles, and I perceived this as well, that we're not supposed to know in CD1 what's transpiring in CD2. Or in Rochester, we're not supposed to think about Mankato. or Winona or Owatonna or Austin. We're not supposed to have connections and liaisons. I mean, as conservatives, right? We're not supposed to have any sort of involvement with the politics of these other closely knit communities that are our neighbors. However, the leftists will take a free floating gypsy caravan of violence around the state, busing it around the state, up to Duluth, over to St. Cloud. They're coming in from out of state for these protests and these riots. We were told to stay home for going on 3 months, 70 something days. We were in lockdown. Of course, I was an essential worker. I had papers in my car for traveling, yeah, and I could go out at any time I wished. But everyone's supposed to stay home because it's the right thing to do. We need to flatten the curve. And then suddenly we have our mayors sponsoring peaceful protests, right? And there's
Right.
these people dressed in black from head to toe,
Right.
dressed in black, Antifa
Yeah.
uniforms,
Yeah.
being bussed in to our community with their fists in the air.
I get it. I think you're listening
Maoists. What do you
too.
think, Jim? Sorry, John.
I think everybody gets it, which is another. I don't know if it's a peeve, but it's useless for people on the right to talk about hypocrisy. Just hang it up. It does
Yeah.
nothing. I mean, that's why I don't read the Federalist. There are some good things there, don't get me wrong. But about 80% of it is, well, what if Republicans had done this? I just can't believe
Right.
the standard. It's baked into the cake. So move on. It's not going to be either effective rhetoric or effective action. The hypocrisy comes with the regressive left. They couldn't operate it. They couldn't operate it. They couldn't operate, thank you, without it. So it's that's why I say it's baked into the cake. And people
Yeah.
say, yeah, but Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals make the other side live up to their own standards and ideals. That only works if you care about not being hypocritical. It doesn't work on the left because they could give a damn, really.
They
And,
keep
and
code shifting, right? They'll keep
um,
going. They're like shapeshifters moving magically between you need to be responsible for what this one, holding an entire race responsible for
but
what
you
one cop did in Minneapolis,
can't do
right?
that. Muslim kills 10 or 20 or more people. What you hear from the left and from the red-green axis is nothing to do with Islam. Of course, it embodies Islam perfectly, and that's something else that you can't criticize. I'm blocked by Minnesota Care. I'm blocked by the national account on Twitter, but I'm a clever fellow. I simply put in the hashtag Care National, and if you search tweets with that in it, there I am. Probably not singing to the choir, but you can't block people from using hashtags. So it's a way around these sorts of things, and and I know there are very many different groups around the state. I wrote in support of the people in St. Cloud who had that hit job done by the latest,
The 2 nights of disturbances in St. Cloud. Are you talking about the current riots that are happening in St. Cloud now?
this was last year, and it's
Oh,
the one where they went after Kim Crockett and the center of the American experiment threw her under the bus. I mean, these are the type of eunuchs that we have who pretend to leadership. Uh,
Unix.
they don't. But I wrote about St. Cloud simply, and I think you helped me get it out, and some other people that I know in Stearns County and in other areas adjacent helped me get it out to those people because they need to know they're not alone. They need to know that they're not wrong for questioning their demographic replacement. They're not wrong for saying they're the only skin color that can be demonized. Any other would be the definition of racism, and somehow it doesn't meet that definition when it's applied to people who look like us. No, you simply call it out.
It's
And
astonishing, isn't it, that a community brings people from 12 time zones away to Minnesota. These people choose to come to St. Cloud. They are given homes, transportation, jobs if they want them, social services, social security, EBT cards. They're given every opportunity, in fact, more opportunity than a native Minnesotan is given in terms of interest-free banking, finance, on loans, finance on debt, unsupervised business loans. And then you see these people in the air with fists in the air or said, saying systemic racism. None of these things existed in East Africa for them. None
Right.
of them.
Right. Well, it was Tucker Carlson once more. I don't like stealing people's quotes or ideas, so I try to attribute. But, and I'm paraphrasing, he described Ilhan Omar as the incarnation of everything wrong with our immigration system. We're importing people who hate us. I don't swear publicly, but you could use
Yeah.
your favorite obscenity. That's just that's deliberate and that's intentional.
And
I
she
I
committed
wanted to,
immigration fraud, and she committed fraud against the
she's
education.
she's untouchable. I mean, give it up. They're not
Yeah.
going to go to her.
I think she's helping us though, John, because she has red pilled more people, because what actually comes out of her pie hole is better than anything we could ever say about her perspective. She's actually saying these things for people to hear. And then we can't be called haters anymore because she's the one saying this is okay.
That's not true, though.
No?
That's not true. I wish it were.
Oh,
Uh, he gets a dispensation from the cathedral. And I want to explain the term the cathedral to your listeners, because if they take nothing else away, this is the best framework with which to understand what is going on right now. And at times, I feel like all the wheels are coming off the bus and I can't be alone. I don't think that's actually true, but the bombardment, the saturation, the relentlessness, it's incessant and it's uniform, is designed to discourage us and to make us feel that we're the only ones who think that way. And ergo, we think that way because we are all the names the left calls us.
mm-hmm.
And it's very sophisticated and sometimes, unfortunately, too effective
Mm-hmm.
form of brainwashing and propaganda.
Gaslighting.
There's someone that your listeners can look up online. He writes under a pen name Moldbug, Moldbug. His first name is Mencius, but his real name is Curtis Yarvin. So you can get to him either way, Yarv as in Victor IN. But he came up with a concept called the cathedral, and I'm not a prisoner of ideology. When reality hits me in a way that my ideological framework can't account for, I try to understand it on its own terms rather than squeeze it into my ideology. I think that's what the left does.
Yes.
No matter, what human nature is like, no matter their histories from lesson, by God, they're going to torture it and fit it into their conceptual framework. So having said that, this is the best conceptual framework that covers most of the waterfront, and no framework is 100%. But this goes really pretty far in a large understanding. And he calls it the cathedral. And the cathedral consists of two parts. One is academia, and the other is corporate media. He says that academia exists to generate policies. And we know how harebrained those can be. Academia generates policies. The media manufactures consent.
Oh, sure.
And that's why all the
Noam
universities
Chomsky.
that's why all the universities think in lockstep. That's why all the media think in lockstep. One narrative that the cathedral pushes relentlessly is racism, and it's only cast in a black, white narrative.
Mm-hmm.
You take white people out of there, and holy Moses, as I'm fond of saying, it's Lord of the Flies.
Don't say anything about Jews by bringing up Moses, by the way.
No,
The left hates Jews equally.
point.
I've had 5 events with Jewish people in Rochester, and they've all been opposed by the liberal media, one of whom was a Holocaust camp survivor of the Terezin camp in what's now known as Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic. But back to your point.
My point is that you won't see much media coverage of racism among minorities, and it is endemic, it is rampant, and the Asians and African Americans don't get along at all. Look at blacks and Hispanics. Who boy, that's not good. And in Southern California, if you dig a little, you can see they're killing each other. My point is that racism only exists in a certain paradigm, sustained and generated by the cathedral. That's why you don't see stories on how the Somalis in the Twin Cities, which is the only area I can speak to with any familiarity. Blacks and Somalis don't get along at all. You'll never see stories about Somali gang crime. Uh, Gangs nationally, white people account for only 10% of all gang members. You can look at the FBI crime statistics, and you can see that 13% of the population account for more than 50% of the homicides, and
Would those be the Amish people?
that would be the black community. And if you think that black women commit crime at the same rate as black men, you're mistaken. And so when you break it out for gender, you've got 6 or 7% of the country creating an enormous disproportionate amount of crime. The one thing that I can say after George Floyd and the violence and the looting and the arson, completely untethered from any discussion about how we treat people equally in this country, people have become much more aware of FBI crime statistics. A year or two ago, Andrew Mannix, who's
Yes,
a guy at the Star Tribune, married to Brianna Biersbach, who used to be at NPR. It's kind of incestuous. Had a stab at how FBI crime statistics are flawed. See, so that's what they do. They try to delegitimate any legit authority that contradicts the narratives they want to generate. So we live in a world created by the cathedral. And Moldbug also goes on to say that this is reinforced by basically what we would call West, the permanent civil service, the permanent bureaucracy, both in DC and throughout these ossified state bodies. The bluer, the more ossified.
Here in the provinces, we have a reception. We receive a lot of these people from Brooklyn and Los Angeles right here into Minnesota who are sent here to manage the provinces. Obama plants will come out and run for Congress in CD1 in the form of Dan Feehan, for instance. But I skipped your record. I hope you can remember your train of thought and get back to that.
What record?
Well, I skipped. You were speaking, and I interrupted you, and I hope that I didn't throw you off too badly. Your point.
Well, then don't do it again.
I won't, John.
I'm kidding.
Everything you're saying is far too important to interrupt. But it's astonishing that we're never allowed to have this conversation. We hear the leftists say they're not afraid to have that conversation. You try to talk about something, they run away.
Wes, buddy. Humor is essential. Otherwise, we end up like scolds on the left. Without humor, we're lost. And we should be able to laugh at ourselves and then just laugh at different circumstances and conditions. Right. But it's the left that's known for that dour, sour,
Yeah.
30
they can't meme. They can't communicate with people. Someone tells them a joke and they literally don't get it. I was posting recently on social media about a black female friend of mine who told me a joke that I couldn't repeat. But I told it to a liberal. She's a conservative, by the way. She's like the Candace Owens in my real life. And I told that joke to a Jewish liberal friend of mine who's sort of culture of that civil disobedience group, that's sort of ethical culture society type person. And it's kind of a Unitarian Universalist mindset, right? About treating everyone with compassion. And my Jewish friend didn't talk to me for 6 months. I said, bro, this is a joke that a black woman's telling from her community. That's the effort in which I was trying to share it with you. Where are we if Irish people can't tell Irish jokes? What happened to Oli and Sven, or Oli and Lena, right? What happened to our tradition of humor? John, did you grow up with Carol Burnett and Hollywood Squares? Then you
yeah, I'm a boomer. Someone called Steve Saylor, who also is on Twitter. I would highly recommend Steve Saylor. That's going to get me labeled a white supremacist right there. Don't care. Michelle Malkin writes for, oh, and if they want to go, if patriotic immigrant reformer types like you and others in the Rochester area or anywhere in Minnesota or the country, the website that I cannot recommend highly enough is V as in Victor, dare, as in I dare you, VDARE.com. That's all I need to say. Go there. It's Steve Saylor, Peter Brumlow, John Derbyshire, who got fired from National Review, at which time Ann Coulter called them girly men, which I have never been, I've never recovered from. So perfect, but that will be labeled as white supremacist, white nationalist, all that sort of stuff. You can't let those names scare you from getting that information. The only reason they call people on the right names is because we've been acculturated by our own to care what they think of us. Once you stop caring what other people think of you, you're really free. I mean that within reason. If you don't care about what others think of you, you're a sociopath. Don't be a sociopath. But don't let any of the names that they call you affect how you think or what you say or what you want to do. That's their greatest chokehold over us. And Steve King was defeated in Iowa. He was thrown under the bus and mutilated because he gave an interview to the New York Times where they misquoted him, wouldn't release the recording. Now, I fault Steve King for going into the lion's den without recording himself. But the point is, Steve King is not a white supremacist. He's not a white nationalist, but he does stand up for America as founded. He does call out anti-white racism, and that's enough for them. Well, our own helped get rid of him, and he lost his primary. Really too bad. And the very night, Wes, the very night that he lost, I forget who beat him. I forget the gentleman's name. That guy was called a white nationalist too. Oh, it doesn't matter if Steve King lost because, Bob Smith, is just as racist and just as nationalist and supremacist as he is. So there, again, to our point, there's no appeasing these people.
But no, there isn't. Over the past year,
Michelle Malkin writes for VDare. Ann Coulter writes for VDare. They just laugh. Everyone should follow Michelle Malkin on Twitter. She's got a YouTube channel that you should subscribe to. She's the leading conservative, bar none. She doesn't write as many books as Ann Coulter. She's got that gig down cold. Again, I don't care. Fine, people make money. But you want to be brave. That's not exactly Ann. She can be controversial all the way to the bank. There's a difference there. I'm not trying to put Ann down. I'm just saying she's not nearly as brave as Michelle Malkin, who defended Nick Fuentes. If anyone listening to me listens to Turning Point USA, don't ever do that again. Charlie Kirk is the enemy. This is AstroTurf on the right. It's corporate donors. He's the one that said we should staple a green card to every university diploma that's issued. No, Charlie, no. Doesn't want to talk about 1 million legal immigrants. And that's the other thing, too, that people on the right have to get off the dime about. It's not just illegal immigration. It's you're signing your own demographic death warrant if you say, as long as they come here legally. No. Ilhan Omar came here legally. I rest my case. The legal immigration is as much of a problem as the illegal. And so we're getting it from both ends of the immigration spectrum. But VDare has very fact-based, very astute analysis of not just immigration, but other cultural issues. And they're fearless. They're fearless. They recently got thrown off Facebook. Go figure.
This is astonishing information, John. And could we just say that maybe we should come to the end of the first segment? We'll do a part 2. We'll be back with more, but this is John Gilmore speaking with us today. RealMinnesota.com is his new startup.
Yeah, but Wes, just to be clear, the site hasn't gone live, so they won't find anything there if they type that in.
Can you
I've just reserved the domain name.
Oh, excellent. Can you just give your preferred social media contacts one more
Sure.
time? How people can find you on Twitter, how
Yeah.
people can subscribe to you, and where they can find your writings, because you have some fantastic research and books that are available.
Well, 4 years ago in April, I wrote, "Do Minnesota Republicans believe in anything?" And my conclusion then hasn't changed in the intervening 4 years. So some days, Wes, I feel like it's Groundhog Day. I don't want to repeat myself. I'll say the same thing that I did. Let me look it up. Oh, 2 years ago or 4 years ago, and nothing has changed. So it sucks to be a conservative in Minnesota. They can reach me at Shabbos Goy on Twitter, SHABB as in boy, OSGOY. And my direct messages are open. That means they don't have to follow me in order to send me a DM. So if people want to reach out, I'll be more than happy to talk to people in the DMs. And my blog is at Minnesota Conservatives plural.org, and there's an archive on the right by year if they want to review some of my other writings. It opens and the title of each post is there. And then if they want to noodle around at alphanewsmn.com, just put my name in the search engine, and everything that I wrote for about 18 months will be there as well. So thanks for this opportunity, Wes, and I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Thank you, John, and we'll be back shortly with part two. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and see you in part two.